So I was gone for about a week and a half because I was watching Ashita no Joe 2 and I finished it about a week and a half ago, and it felt so draining. I needed to take a break from this story, and I was writing the script for the analysis, which was finished today. A whole 27 pages, hour and 8 minutes worth of script. I do plan to shave it down, cut it down, but for now I'll do an improvised version of this because that's going to be a very long video. So I'd rather have a short, more improvised version, and then a more analytical and more in-depth type of video. Now, I didn't know till the end of the first season of Ashita no Joe 2, of the first one, that everything, but there will be spoilers. I always put it in the description, so if you don't want to get spoiled, don't watch this unless you've already seen it or don't care about spoilers. But I had no idea that in Ashita no Joe, the first season, everything after Rikishi's death was, for the most part, kind of filler. Some of it does follow the manga, but it does go far off into its own. It's doing its own type of story and ending. I did have an issue with the end that Joe just runs away again. I didn't really like that. I get it, he's tomorrow's Joe, and Tange Dampe feels that he'll be back, but other than that, I would still recommend it. I'm still glad that I watched it. The staff itself is legendary, so they were able to carry on the torch that the original author and artist were able to do with Joe. It was very good. And so Ashita no Joe 2 starts back when Rikishi first dies. So if you did what I did and you watched this casually and you moved on to Ashita no Joe 2, you will feel very confused because it goes back to where Rikishi dies fighting Joe, and Joe runs away because he's haunted by the ghost of Rikishi, because he feels all this guilt that he took part in killing him with that deadly temple punch. And so the first 10 episodes, I think, of Ashita no Joe 2, for the most part, can go off of where the first season went after Rikishi died. There are some minor differences, very small differences between Ashita Joe 2's episodes compared to the season 1, the ones that are similar. For example, in Ashita no Joe 2, when Yabuki meets with Wolf and they get into that scuffle, Joe gets arrested in the first season, where in the second season, Gondo helps him get out. It's just little minor details like that. But the series starts off that Joe has run away and left Tange once more. And Tange, of course, is sad. And whenever he gets put in these situations where Joe runs away and he can't be found, becomes an alcoholic again. And the kids, without Joe around, they get bored to the point that they go back to the old selves of scamming and being delinquents. Nishi has moved on for the most part. In Ashita no Joe 2, Nishi for the most part abandons boxing altogether and just moves on from his life to other things. I didn't really like Nishi's character in season 2. First of all, they ruined him with an alternate voice actor that doesn't have that same charm the original one had. Second of all, he gets reduced to just a background character. And then I liked about Nishi, he's just kind of just there, doesn't do anything relevant. He was very relevant in the first season with all that he went through. Even the anime only part of the filler end of the first season was still portraying Nishi well. But in the second one, he just became irrelevant and unimportant. Didn't really like him. Fortunately for him, he had Noriko had to settle for second best, so I'll get to that later. And as Joe is sort of searching in this town, he decides to just go back. In the first season, he went through this whole thing where Gondo inspired him and made him think about it. But in the second season, he just sort of decided to go back. And the reason, this is partly because you would expect it, because what happened with Wolf. Wolf is the one that he did the cross counter to and broke his jaw, forcing him to retire. And so Joe sees that Wolf has now joined the Yakuza to become a gangster, and he gets beaten up by Gondo because he has that weakness of the chin. And Joe, of course, goes to defend Wolf. He can't stand that he's being not just beaten up by Gondo, but that he's being disrespected by what Gondo has to say about Wolf. That Wolf is somebody who lives with off of the glory of the past, who the fire and passion of his eyes is no longer there. But he tells Joe that he still sees it in him, and Joe does not want to end up like Wolf, and decides that it's time to come back after that whole entire situation. As he comes back, he is still struggling to get over the death of Rikishi, and he didn't realize it at first, but he can no longer punch in the temple because he has that guilt of that deadly temple punch that took out Rikishi. And so he comes back. Tonga is happy, you know, they'll open up the gym, they celebrate and all that, and Joe heads back towards these new matches, and he starts defeating all his opponents with body blows over and over and over again. He spars with Nishi when he comes back and defeats Nishi with body blows. In the first season, they picked up upon it right away. But in the Virgin and Ashura no Joe 2, it takes a while for them to pick up that Joe has this subconscious guilt that does not allow him to punch boxers in the face. He will hesitate, he will stop, he will pretend to, or he can't do it. And Dampe was all happy, saying, okay, Joe's back, he's taking out opponents, but he's only doing body shots, and this is his downfall. This has made the situation hopeless. Joe needs to overcome this, or it's over for him. What can help Joe with this? And Joe just begins losing all his matches that are supposed to be his great comebacks. He's completely embarrassed. And when he does manage to punch in the face, he starts vomiting, which again is tied to Rikishi. The doctors claim that it's a medical mystery. They don't know why Joe is throwing up or vomiting when he's punching. In the first season, I think they referred to it as blood. And in the second season, I don't think they actually referred to what exactly it was he was vomiting. You just see it as sparkly water in the series itself. And so it's all over again, and Joe decides to travel. But that's in the first season. The second season sort of breaks away from that because they introduce Carlos, obviously. And Carlos is the inspiration that Joe needed to overcome this desperation, this hopeless situation. It is the fire and passion that Joe feels and the rivalry of Carlos that helps him overcome his vomiting. And Carlos is there in the first place because of Yoko Shiraki. You know, in this, just as in season 1, her grandfather decides to sell the Shiraki gym to somebody, but Yoko decides to take it. She wants it as her own and asks for it, almost demands for it, you could say, and does get it. And the first thing she decides to do is to get a new boxer to go up against Joe. And this is where we get Carlos Rivera from Venezuela, which also gives us an introduction to Robert. Now, Carlos is one of the happiest, most wholesome, good, just happy-go-lucky characters in the series. He's majestic element. He's a flirt, extraordinary boxer, clever, cunning. Just what Joe needed. And then Robert is you could say, his best friend and his manager. They both grew up in the slums of Venezuela, and they have this issue where when they get to a country, Carlos is just so good that he scares the other boxers, and they don't want to challenge him. This includes the championships. This includes the champions themselves. As a result of this fear that Carlos gets, whatever country he gets to, he develops the nicknames, the champion without a belt, or the uncrowned king. And so they develop a strategy when they get to Japan. And this strategy is to pretend to be bad and to pretend to be lucky. And Yoko didn't know about this in the first season. I don't know if in the second one she did or did not. I don't think she did. But in the first season, she had no idea that they were doing this. So the plan is that Carlos takes hits on purpose, and he makes it seem as if he is losing. And Robert, of course, is just panicking on purpose, fake panicking. He's like, "Oh, Carlos, no, like Carlos, cringe." I mean, their accents are just hilarious. The passion and fire in their accents makes you laugh. You know, Carlos is supposed to be from Venezuela, but the voice actor can't even pronounce muchas gracias correctly. Anyhow, they put this act on, and when Robert gives the signal, Carlos will deliver the knockout punch. And of course, it's cheating. You know, Carlos's punch is the elbow punch, where he punches the opponent so hard and so fast that he sneaks in the elbow follow-up right after. And in the first season, nobody really seems. Joe doesn't really seem to care about it. But in the second season, he points out how it's illegal, which makes Robert angry. It's just another difference. And so Carlos, when he gets the signal, delivers the punch and knocks out his opponents. And the audience and the ring announcers, of course, they're shocked. They're like, what just happened? How did Carlos win? And the act continues. And Robert goes, "Oh, Carlos, you got lucky. It's a lucky punch." And Carlos like, "Yeah, lucky. I'm lucky." And so this goes on for a while until Carlos goes up against Tiger, and from there the act is up. And Carlos does what Rikishi did with the finger up in the air with the one. He's like, he'll defeat Tiger in the first round in just a couple of seconds. Now during this whole time, Joe is just trying to overcome what happened to him with the vomiting, and he starts to take this interest in Carlos Rivera. He had met him before, and Carlos knew the skill that Joe had when he recognized him in the ring first, other than the other guy that was supposed to be stronger. And so in the match against Tiger, Carlos comes in with a knockout punch and takes out Tiger Ozaki in one punch. This was a message to Joe, and Joe does receive the message. And then the fire comes in. The passion returns to Joe, and he ends up asking Yoko to hire him as Carlos' sparring partner, and Yoko allows it. Yoko. You see, Dampe is against a lot of the things that Joe wants to do, whereas Yoko is sort of like a second Dampe that is much more supportive, gives Joe much more freedom to do things that he shouldn't be doing. Yoko has more faith in Joe than Dampe has, but it's a face that is dangerous, and that because Dampe is too protective of Joe, whereas Yoko believes in Joe so much that she trusts that he'll do what he says he'll do. There's a huge difference there between the two of them. And so during the sparring match, they end up fighting, and Carlos asks for his music, and he plays around until Joe gives him a cross counter, and then Carlos decides to shut off the music and get serious. And Joe, of course, begins vomiting again, but he begins to overcome this medical mystery, this vomiting, and he gets back to the sparring, and they just wail at each other, go back and forth until they're stopped. And so this eventually leads to the match between Carlos Rivera and Joe Yabuki, and it was a brilliant match. It was a harsh match. Lots of clever techniques were used, such as Joe using the ropes to propel his arm into Carlos's chest. Carlos's light speed punches that look like some kind of like bizarre like shonen superpower, but it was with the glowing eyes and the invisible punches. But it was just to express how fast the punches were. And the match is just brutal. It goes on to the very end. But what I like about it is that this wasn't just any regular boxing match. It wasn't a match for the audience. It wasn't a match to win. It wasn't a match to win as fast as you could. It was a match between two men who love boxing and also fell in love with their own rivalry against each other. You can see it when they have 5 rounds left, and Carlos says, he's half knocked out in the corner, and he says, 5 rounds. I'm so glad that I have 5 more rounds to fight with Joe Yabuki. They plan to go at it to the end. And even when they double knock out each other in the middle of the ring, and they're struggling to get back up, Carlos tells Joe, Joe, get up, stand up, Joe, stand up. And Joe, he always laughs in the face of threats and desperation and hopelessness. And so this match was entirely for themselves. They didn't care about it, and they end up in a draw. But this would prove kind of hurtful later, because then we get introduced to Jose Mendoza, the perfect family man, the perfect champion, the strongest man in the world, the man with the corkscrew punch. And right away, he's supposed to be from he's from Mexico, but he has very terrible Spanish, but he knows fluent Japanese, and his Spanish pronunciation is kind of bad. Like when he says caballero, he pronounced it in a way I can't even imitate it without listening to it closely in the mispronunciation. Anyhow, He is the world champion, and he is going to become Carlos's next opponent. And keep in mind that this championship match that Carlos is going to have with Jose, just now that I mentioned, he had the opportunity before, but there was nothing that was going to stop Joe and Carlos' match, even though Robert and a rich promoter were trying to bribe them both to cancel so that Carlos can go back to challenging Jose. They refused because they wanted to fight. There was no going back, no matter what they were trying to be bribed or sold out with. Because Joe and Carlos, they'd have some times to bond, such as back in Christmas when Carlos ran away because Robert kept trying to make him cancel the match, and he became this Santa Claus that was giving out gifts to the kids, to the slums. And him and Joe have a moment where they kind of play around, and Joe tries to fight him, and Carlos just keeps dodging him. Joe just kind of finds it funny. And then they talk about how they're excited for their match and how they're going to give it their all. And, it's a healthy rivalry that these two had. Joe always has these healthy rivalries, though sometimes it can get very dangerous, as later on in what happens. So, some time has passed now, and there is a boxer that is trying to challenge Joe. But Dampe does not want Joe to go up against him because it's a dangerous boxer. Now that's Kim. Dampe had heard that this Kim is very dangerous and had killed 2 opponents in the ring. And knowing Joe, who would fight anybody as long as he put gloves on them, Tonga decided that he would try to block this match off as long as he could and just ignore it. All the while, Carlos is getting ready to fight Jose Mendoza. And Joe and Yoko are just so absolutely sure that Carlos is going to win. So time passes by, and Yoko decides to pay Joe for the match against Carlos. And she tries to be generous and gives Joe a lot of money, which makes Joe mad because everything that Yoko does makes him angry. Because he has a lot of... Joe is very, very poor. Or he grew up very, very poor, whereas Yoko is very, very rich and sheltered. And Joe, though he was very antisocial, he's very analytical and observant about these class differences. And he just absolutely despises that Yoko tries to... She's not doing it on purpose, but how she kind of flaunts her wealth around and tries to be so charitable. Because Joe just doesn't think that she's sincere, that she does it for herself. As explained in season 1 where he chokes her out. Anyhow, during this, while they talk, they even point this out too. Like every time that we talk, it ends in disaster. And one of Yoko's men comes and says that the match has started between Carlos and Jose Mendoza. And so Joe and Yoko talk for a bit about the money, how Joe wants exactly what his share, not any more or any less. And immediately they get another update right away. And they find out that Carlos has lost. Yoko and Joe were so sure he'd win. They could not believe that Jose Mendoza had apparently knocked out Carlos in a minute and a half. And Robert gives a post-match interview where he claimed that Carlos was already defeated because he never managed to recover from Joe's match. He received what they later call punch-drunk syndrome, which is a real thing in boxing. And so you get a hint of it when Carlos had left after Joe's match, where he falls on the stairs to the airplane. And so Carlos was apparently fighting very sloppily. He wasn't right on the head. He had brain damage. And Carlos gave him a devastating multiple corkscrew punches. Joe would look at the tape later and he would see that Jose did more than he had to. And so Carlos was destroyed so bad, he was reduced to a childlike state, and he forgot who he was. He forgot a lot of things. He became unable to do basic everyday things. Like he got reduced to being on a wheelchair, mentally disabled. That's the end of Carlos. That's it. And Joe just cannot believe it that this would happen to Carlos. But this sort of ignites this vengeful type spirit in Joe, where now he wants to box and fight this with Mendoza, not just for his sake, but for Carlos' sake. And what happens is Joe needs to build himself up towards Jose Mendoza, and Yoko is going to do what she can to help him. Now with that playlist done, we'll go ahead and go to the first Joe. Why not? So first is Kim, the Korean boxer who had a very traumatic childhood. They got explained before their match. And the thing about Kim is that he grew up during the Korean War, and he was a child stuck in the middle of warfare, and he found a soldier that was half dead in a crater-like area, and the soldier gets up and appears to try to get him, and Kim ends up bashing his head in with a rock and stealing his food because he was hungry. And so the soldiers come and they round up the civilians saying, "Who killed this man?" And when they say his name, Kim realizes that this was his father, that he had actually killed his father because he was wasted. He lost a lot of weight from the war. He was covered in mud and wearing a hat, so he couldn't tell it was his father. And as soon as Kim realizes this, he vomits. And in the vomit, the soldiers saw that it was the food, the specific type of food that is given to them for the war, the crackers and whatnot. So they beat this child unmercifully till the child says, no, that was my dad. I accidentally killed my own dad. And the colonel feels so bad that the colonel takes him in and makes him sort of like his son and trains him to be a boxer. And this Kim, or the dragon, they cover up his history. He's very mysterious. Suga ends up entering the picture, who was a journalist with ties to the financial and political field. And he has been observing Joe since the beginning of his boxing career, and he loves Joe. He loves that Joe is this free-spirited wild beast, and he has been documenting him to the point he wants to write his biography. And he ends up becoming comrades with Yoko, with getting information that would help Joe, or help Joe out. And so he ends up getting hired by Yoko to go to Korea to find information on Kim. And he manages to get very little, such as that Kim was raised on a military base. He's actually a soldier, and he's been in brutal wars, and his training base is somewhere in his training area is somewhere in the military base. Now there's an issue going on here before this match, and that is that Joe, being a young kid, is growing up. And he is gaining weight because his body is growing, and he cannot stop it. He's a young kid. Yoko tells him this, and Joe, of course, he absolutely refuses to let this stop him. And what he decides to do is to lose weight and to essentially go through what Rikishi went through. Because Joe will tell Dampe that if Rikishi can drop 2 weight classes to be able to challenge Joe, then he's like, I can do the same just to stay in my own class, because he's a bantamweight. Dampe kept telling him, just become featherweight, just move up. You can't do this to yourself like Rikishi did. But Joe does it because if he becomes featherweight, all his opponents, he won't be able to fight them no more. Carlos was featherweight, Kim is featherweight, Jose Mendoza is featherweight. So to him, becoming bantamweight, sorry, not featherweight. So to Joe, moving up to featherweight is not an option, and he will do it even if it kills him, because Rikishi did it. Why can't he? So that's his argument. And he goes on and starts starving himself. Doesn't even drink water. And they try to feed him, and he just refuses to eat. He starts to look pale. Even Yoko manages to pick up on this and tells Joe that he looks like he's suffering. Joe then decides to hide in the second floor of the Dampe gym and takes the ladder up with him. And they try to get him down. Dampe gets a grill, starts cooking meat, trying to lure Joe down with the smell. And you can see Joe the desperation that he's hungry. But Dampe, of course, falls asleep, which lets Joe escape. Even then, with Joe back up there, Noriko came by and tried to make him some tomato sandwiches. But Joe, of course, did not want it. He even had a can of tomato juice, and he throws them on the floor. I mean, he says thank you and tries to act grateful about this, but throws the food on the floor from the second floor, sending it wasting on the floor below. And Noriko cries, the kid cries. It's a tragic moment, that Joe is putting himself through this. He eventually manages to find the same storage room that Rikishi was starving himself in, and locks himself in there. And Dampe, of course, goes over there to try to get him out, but is not able to. He gets kind of beat up trying to get Joe out of there. And so Joe locks himself up. He even blocks the window so Danpei can't look at him. And Danpei waits because he feels that one day Joe will break just like Rikishi did, and tells everybody to just leave them be. And then Danpei himself begins fasting as well to join Joe. And he can hear Joe inside hitting that breaking point, which starts panicking. He needs water and he needs food. But unlike Rikishi, Joe manages to overcome it and just stays there. And now Danpei knows very well and good that if he does not do anything here, Joe will die. He'll kill himself out of starvation. And so he tells Joe, enough is enough. I would add fasting into your training. If you're going to fast, then you can fast, and I'm going to push you to do it. And Joe says, all right. And you can see a crying Danpei training Joe, trying to put a cottonwood mouse over his lips to keep them from getting dry. And as a last resort, he sends Nishi to get this piece of a scale and modify it, so it will show Joe the way that he wants and trick him. And Nishi goes and he does this, and Danpei puts it on the scale. And he figured if he does this, the damage to Joe's body won't be as severe if you can trick him this way. And he does trick him that way. Joe gets the weight requirement, or meets the weight requirement. And so Kim's match now coming up, and the weigh-in happens. And Danpei is prepared for what's going to happen because he knows Joe's going to get mad when he finds out that the scale will show he's too heavy to be in bantamweight. And it happens, and Joe is confused. He says the scale must be broken. And the people around him, the people holding the weigh-in tell him, no, this is an official scale. Yours is the one that's broken. And then Danpei apologizes to Joe and tells him that what he has done. And Joe gets angry and just beats Danpei and says, you know what? I have a couple of hours to do something here. And he decides to go and find ways to lose weight. Takes strong laxatives. Takes over a sauna and locks himself in there almost kills himself like he did the first time he tried to lock himself into a sauna-like room. And he still has not lost enough weight. His last ditch effort was to go donate blood until he hadn't lost enough to hit the weight limit, and he does that. He barely manages to reach the weight. Despite this, he managed to get his body accustomed to the fast, and he does somewhat restore his body. You know, his face was dried up and it kind of came back. The match against Kim starts, and what I liked about the match was just the retro style. I'm not sure if the manga did that because I'm not up to there yet in the manga yet. But in this fight, as the dragon is beating Joe and punching him, they synchronize it with the sounds of war, explosions, and machine guns. That was very fascinating to watch. And then eventually, he realizes that Joe is not going down, which kind of starts to freak him out. And he tells Danpei at some point, this guy is a monster. And all this time, they're wondering about the chum chum. You know, Kim has this technique called the chum chum that he used to kill 2 boxers. And the reason why nobody knows what it is because the video footage of the 2 boxers that died this way was confiscated because of its cruelty and brutality. And Kim begins to hesitate, and even his manager tells him, what are you doing? Why are you disobeying me? Because Kim is kind of scared, becoming kind of scared of Joe. How Joe just keeps coming back up after the punches. But he does use the chum chum on Joe, and Joe gets back up. And Kim is just completely horrified that this monster will not go down. But then, because of his trauma from his violent childhood, when Joe shows his bloodied up head, Kim sees his dad's face, and this allows Joe to move in and completely destroy Kim and knock him out. And Joe will later find out that he caused that Kim would quit boxing. He will cause yet another boxer to quit boxing, and that will be Kim. Now there is some filler here. I will mention Leon Smiley. This was a filler arc where Joe fights this African American from Brooklyn, New York, who is obsessed with being the king. He's very provocative, likes to talk trash. He even learns Japanese insults to throw at Joe during his match. But it's a very unsettling arc because of the situation of the Joker. See, because Leon likes to play with cards and do flashy tricks, and he keeps pulling the Joker card, and it makes him sort of feeling disturbed. So eventually, Joe has to fight this guy to be able to go on to face Jose Mendoza, while Jose Mendoza himself needs to challenge the other the other champion that is over the other half of the world. So they both need to defeat these opponents to be able to challenge each other. And Joe doesn't even think about the possibility of any of them losing. He just knows that they're gonna win. They're gonna move on to do it. And Dante tries to warn Joe that, make sure you guys gotta both win for this to happen. But Joe already sees it happening, like I said. The match with Leon Smiley was brutal with Joe, but Joe wins by points. And at the end, Joe meets up with Leon and his manager by coincidence. They decide to go out, have some fun together. And then Smiley does his card tricks and gets the Joker card again. And he says, "How could I get this card again? I thought I took it out." And so they zoom in on the Joker card. They play this like creepy music, and it's just like a unsettling, disturbing moment where this Joker card just will not leave Leon alone. So he decides to go on a drive, and he keeps thinking about the Joker card. Why do they keep seeing this Joker card? Then a biker goes by and makes him turn really hard, and he ends up crashing, and then he ends up burning alive and dying. And his manager has to go and look at the body bag and look at this his burnt up boxer who was supposed to be his 13th champion, the King of Kings. Before Leon crashed, he even said it like, "I'm the King of Kings," and he's dead. And Joe is shocked and spends the night sort of trying to move on from it, But because it's a filler arc, that in the next episode nobody seems to care anymore about Leon. They all forget. As for Jose, he takes on Gomez, who is the second champion who is over the other half of the world. And Jose allows him to do some punches for free. He places his hands on Gomez's shoulders and says to hit me. And they'll explain later, what exactly happened here. But Gomez's punches have no effect on Jose Mendoza. And Joe thinks to himself, or tells Shiraki that Jose knows he has this one. He's just letting himself take punches out of honor of the other guy, of his opponent being a champion, and then delivers these deadly corkscrew punches that completely destroy Gomez. And then later on, Yoko would meet up with Joe and tell him that, Jose killed this boxer. He died in the hospital right after. And then all of a sudden it clicks to Joe, because after the match at the casino, Joe had gone to go meet Jose Mendoza, and Jose told him that sometimes he feels very depressed, especially like tonight. And he said that because he knew that he had killed this boxer, and Joe realized it there. And I like how they sort of flaunt Jose's strengths. How he flips the coin at Joe, and when Joe looks at it, it's bent in half. Or when Jose Mendoza and Joe first met, Jose went up to Joe, tapped him on the shoulders and said, like, "Good luck." And then when Joe gets to the gym, Dante sees that the simple tap on his shoulders left marks from Jose's bare hands. So Leon is dead and Gomez wins. So around this time, we will be introduced to Harimau, the hunter turned boxer from Malaysia. This was the most disappointing fight in the series because the fight it was very lackluster. It didn't really serve any purpose rather than to show that Joe is beginning to suffer the early symptoms of the punch drunk syndrome. So, and the other thing that happens here is Carlos. Carlos had escaped from the hospital, and so he's missing for months at this point. And it was sad, back when Jose Mendoza had cracked Carlos in the head, because it turns out that Joe did kind of start it, but Jose was the one that finished Carlos off. His corkscrew punch cracked Carlos' skull and left him confused with amnesia, with the personality of like a 7-year-old kid. And it was sad to see Robert react to this. The last time that we see Robert is when he gave the interview and sees Carlos getting taken off in the stretcher, and he says, "Goodbye, my Carlos Rivera." We will never see Robert again, which is, I felt so bad because Robert was such a happy, optimistic, happy-go-lucky character in the series. He must have been so devastated. We never got to see him again after that, or the viewers never got to see him again after that. So now, the next thing that happens is with Harimao. Yoko believes that even though Joe is essentially winning all his matches up to Jose Mendoza, because she knows Joe so well, despite not being an expert in boxing, she feels that Joe has lost the wild side of him. And so she has her men go find a boxer who has this wild beast type aspect to their skill that would awaken it back in Joe. And all her men find Harimao. And this does bring back that spark in Joe. And Joe even uses the Yakuza with the help of Gondo to train, because he feels the best way to train going against somebody as wild as Harimao is to fight brawlers, since it's unorthodox and a whole different thing. But I mean, there was a funny part where Joe kept getting embarrassed with Harimao. There's a point where Joe spars with him, and because he wasn't paying attention, Harimao drop kicks him out of the ring, and he gets stuck on the ropes, and he looks like he's crucified. And but overall the match was just disappointing. Now, if I could talk about something else here, Yoko is starting to become very close to Joe. I mean, she's always following him around, and even Carlos asks her, like, why do you bother with Joe so much? And she says, I don't understand. In the first season, she says that she felt like she had been fighting him since the beginning. But you can sort of see her attitude change towards Joe, even though Joe hates everything she does because Joe finds an issue with her trying to be this great savior. She develops this soft spot for Joe. You can tell the way she looks at him sometimes. She has this great appreciation, this great respect for Joe, despite how much of a delinquent he can be. They have a moment at some point where she tells Joe she wants to show him around in Hawaii, and they walk at the beach, and she lets him drive his car and has no idea that Joe doesn't know how to drive. And in typical Joe fashion, he starts spinning around, and luckily they were in the middle of the beach, so he didn't crash into anything. But at the end of that, even though Yoko was scared, they have this moment where she laughs and he laughs, and she often takes him out to go eat together, have tea together. You can tell, what's coming between Yoko and Joe. At the same time, there's Noriko. It was obvious since the beginning of the series that Noriko had this big crush on Joe. But Joe, see, he never thought about marriage. He never thought about love. All he thought about was boxing. He was too busy. He was too caught up on boxing. His priorities toward love were so low. Towards marriage were so low. He didn't care about it at the time. And Noriko, she tried to give hints, but Joe would be oblivious to all of them. But Joe's tricky. Sometimes he knows exactly what's going on, but he pretend he doesn't. So you never know. Maybe he didn't know about Noriko. He just didn't want to do it, because Joe would always tell Nishi to go for it. He always encouraged Nishi to go for it. And even in the end, Noriko goes up to Joe and tells him that, yeah, I'm with Nishi and I love him, but it was hard to choose. And Joe seems to have no idea what she's talking about. And Noriko gets kind of sad because she loves Joe, but she wanted Joe to sort of figure it out. But honestly, Noriko should have just told him. She should have just told him how she felt. What was she afraid of? She should have been honest. Because in the beginning, even Joe kind of has these little adorable moments with Noriko. So that was the problem with Noriko. She was never able to tell Joe how she felt. And she ended up settling for Nishi. She ended up settling for second best. And I've seen some manga panels where you can see the look on her face at the wedding. Even though she's with Nishi, she's probably thinking to herself, what if this isn't what I really wanted? What if Joe was here? And even Joe himself, because the manga is famous for being able to portray heavy emotions just by the way that they're drawn, by their facial expression. Because yes, Noriko and Nishi do get married, and they have a celebration and all that. And but I really did not care about Nishi at all in the second season, and Asha and Nojo too. So I just don't really have much to say about him at all, other than he was a good character that ended very weak. That's too bad for him. And moving right along with the issue of the punch drunk syndrome. At the end of the Harimau fight, he does see Carlos. Carlos finally wanders in and after being missing, and Joe invites him to his locker. But as Joe goes to the locker room, he slips and he falls on the floor, and no one thinks much of it. Then, oh yeah, he just took a bad step. But then as he's walking towards his locker, he tells Dampe that he's going blind, and Joe goes blind for a couple of seconds, which worries Dampe. In the locker room, Joe sees Carlos and sees the pathetic state that he's in, that Carlos can barely formulate sentences. He has this drunken-like, confused, perpetually drunken and confused look in his face. His eyes are droopy, and he's smelly, he's hasn't bathed, he's wearing old clothes, he's homeless. And Joe sees this, and he just is shocked, starts crying. He's like, this isn't the Carlos that I knew anymore. This is just a hollow shell of a human being. And it shatters Joe. He felt guilt over it at first too, till he figures out that it was Jose that finished him off. And Yoko had come in, and Joe screams like, no, like, don't look at Carlos. But it was too late. But even more, in addition to that being worrisome, Yoko realizes that Joe cannot button Carlos's shirt, which is also a sign of punch drunk syndrome. So now Dampe and Yoko are both worried that Joe is unable to do these basic things as well. And so now with the match fit Jose going by, Yoko and Dampe are having second thoughts about it, and they decide to figure out whether or not Joe has punch drunk syndrome. So Yoko goes as far as to get Jose Mendoza's professional doctor to look at previous videos of Joe boxing to determine whether or not it looks like he has the syndrome. And she begs. It looks like she's begging the doctor to please tell him if he has it or not, and to use his expertise. And the doctor does eventually tell Yoko, like, why do you, what does Joe mean to you? Why do you bother with him so much like this? And of course the staff don't reveal what Yoko says next. They go to outside the car so you can't hear. But I'm pretty sure by that time Yoko had realized it, and she had told the doctor why, which I'll explain later on. Dampe himself does some research and does these tests to see if Joe has punch drunk syndrome or not. And Joe is confused, of course, because he's training and he thinks that it's part of the training. And he wonders why Dampe is making him dodge basketballs and walk over bridges, kind of dangerously. But he doesn't think much of it. And then Dampe says, "Okay, good. This means Joe doesn't have punch drunk syndrome." However, you can start to see changes in Joe. So he becomes very forgetful, which is unusual of him. And there's a month now left for the match between Jose Mendoza. They signed it off. Yoko organized it, and Joe decides to make one more trip to visit Carlos and go see him at the care home. And Carlos at that point is reduced to a wheelchair. He has to be taken care of. He can't. He's like a child. That was the end. Carlos is no longer there. There's somebody else there. But I mean, Carlos will sort of flicker here and there with his memories, but he's, like I said, he's disabled now. And Joe shares an apple with him and thinks back when Carlos was himself during the winter, how they had bonded together. He thinks that this match is not just for him, but this match against Jose is for him and Carlos, and he hopes he can ignite. Around this time is when he gives Noriko that famous speech where he tells him that, Noriko tells him to quit boxing, to enjoy your youth. But to Joe, he has such a unique worldview that he tells Noriko that to him, enjoying his youth has a completely different meaning to him. that he wants to brighten up like a torch, but all you see is embers that turn to ash, white ash, all white. And Noriko has no idea what he's talking about, so she's kind of confused. And it's just an iconic moment. There's so many iconic moments. Like before that, there's the part where after Joe's match with Carlos, he's holding up his drink. I think it was a beer. And he told him that for sure, Carlos will become world champion. You get that smug Joe holding the drinks, another iconic shot. Then the results come in, but the doctor tells Yoko the very unfortunate news that the doctor tells Yoko that he suspects, or assuming that Joe does have drunk punch syndrome based on the tapes that Yoko gave him of his matches, and that he is in a very advanced state. And Yoko had been pressing the doctor and telling him, like, why didn't you tell me this? Why did you hesitate to tell me this? And now she knows. But you see, it can get better if Joe would allow himself to get checked, because the doctor tells Yoko he has a 99% chance that Joe has it. But that 1% chance of him not having it can increase if Joe would allow the doctor to check him out. But Joe is completely ignoring Yoko, ignoring her calls. Yoko will show up in the rain to his gym, and Joe will ignore him. And Joe even tells Dampe, just cut off Yoko, and ignore everything. And Yoko can't get to him. As much as she tried, she couldn't get to him. And Joe becomes extremely stubborn here, but they do explain why at the end. It makes sense at the end why he was so stubborn here. And it got to the point where Joe had to run away to a house somewhere off in an undisclosed location with Dampe, where they trained up until Jose's match. And of course, Suga or Suga, who is the journalist, him having a lot of sources and being very resourceful, tells Yoko where Joe and Dampe went. And she goes over there. But when she's over there, Joe and Dampe are away at night, going for a night jog, and she ends up leaving. And that episode towards the end of Joe and Dampe at that house, it was an episode for the two of them, to show the bond that they went through, the hardships and struggles, the back and forth, the fighting, how they worked so hard and succeeded to get somewhere, to get to the top, near the top. Because there are so many emotional moments between Dampe and Joe, precious moments. Times where things seem so bad, and times where things were getting so good. They're just Dampe. I have so much respect for Dampe for being that father figure, that mother figure, taking Joe in, putting his own life on the line, running over fires, getting beat, beating his alcoholism. Joe gave Dampe a second chance at life, and Dampe in that episode towards the end shows his appreciation to Joe for this, and Joe likewise tells him, if it weren't for you, where would I be? He said, would I had still been a boxer? I think Dampe said he thought so. Well, I guess we're in round 2 of the playlist. I don't know if it's gonna help or if I'm asking for a copyright strike, but So now we're towards the end, and the match is going to start. And there is one more major thing that happens before the match starts. Joe's in the locker room, ready to face Jose Mendoza. And Yoko, as a last-ditch effort, goes into the locker room and confronts Joe, locks the door behind her. Now Joe can't run. And she tells Joe to please cancel the match, not to have it. And Joe says, no, there's no way, I'm going to have this match. And then Joe spits out that she says, I love you, Joe. She's like, to cancel the match, and that I love you. And she gets surprised. She wasn't expecting to tell him this. And Joe is surprised too. And Yoko tells him, yes, it's true, that she does love him, and that it took her a while to realize it, but that Joe is the only man that is for her. And typical Joe, he smiles, but he gets serious, and he puts her hands over her shoulders against the door and tells her, thank you, but the strongest man in the world is out there waiting for me. I must go. And he leaves her. She tries her best, but she failed. And Joe closes the door behind her quick so that the reporters and Dampe outside wouldn't see her. I waited so long for that moment between Yoko and Joe. It was so bittersweet. You know, I was waiting for that to happen. I mean, this is a show that you will cry at least in 30 or 40 different, at least in 30 different episodes. It's such an emotional show. And then the match starts, and Joe fights against Jose Mendoza. And right away, Joe is losing. He doesn't stand a chance against Jose. He takes corkscrew punches, gets back up. Starts going blind in one eye. He's getting the beatdown of his lifetime. And Yoko is there watching this. Everybody's there watching this. Aoyama comes back. The prisoners from back in the day came back. They're older. They have day jobs now. They're there watching. Gondo's there. I'm assuming that Suga is there. Wolf is there. You know, Wolf became scum, but he redeemed his character. Him and Joe had a moment before that with the whole the money borrowing thing, and Wolf did pay it back. You know, the kids are there. Nishi's there. Dampe's there. There are some changes though, because from the manga, Nishi and Noriko weren't there originally. And so Joe was just taking a pounding. He's taking a beating, but he won't. And his punches have no effect on Jose Mendoza at all. But then Carlos, even though he's in the state that he's in, goes to the ringside and this distracts Jose and allows Joe to land some punches in. And Jose's manager notices that Jose is kind of struggling to beat Joe and says, "You can do this. You know, you're the best. You're the greatest." But then Joe, of course, he has this philosophy that keep going, no matter what, keep going. Even if you have doubts, keep going. Improvise and hope that it works. And he says that this is the way that he has lived. This is the way he has lived his life, even when he was a small child, running away from orphanage to orphanage, wandering on his own. And he steals Jose Mendoza's corkscrew punch, and he starts nailing Jose, actually doing damage with Jose's own move. And when that round ends, Dampe sits Joe down and says, "Joe, you're amazing. You're incredible. You're hitting Jose with his own attack, the corkscrew punch." And Joe at that point is like a quarter of the way gone, and he says, "I did. Like, I used it." And Dampe's like, "Don't you know you're using it?" And Joe's like, "I guess I did, but I'm just trying to punch him hard to get to the bone, to the skull." And the match goes on, and it is brutal. You know, Jose starts to struggle, but he's also pounding just Joe so hard that Joe ends up going completely blind in his right eye. And Joe is going at it non-stop. He's saying, "Say no, 1, 2," and it just rushes. Jose punches him out, gets pounded to the floor again. The referee just starts doing the countdown, 1, 2, 3, and then Joe takes over and he starts saying the countdown. He's like 4, 5, 6, and he gets up and saying 7, and he says 8. Rushes towards Joe. He uses the ropes to stay up. He gets corkscrew punched, and about at least 8, 9 times. Joe is about to fall. It looks like he's gonna fall, and he might just somehow keep his balance. But it's getting brutal, and even Dampe wants to throw in the towel. But Yoko, who sees Joe struggling halfway through the match, she's not able to see it anymore, and she runs away. And she tells the driver to take her back. But then she thinks about it, and she's always been running away when it comes to Joe. And that this time, she wants to be there for him, to support him. And so she ends up having the driver take her back. And when she comes to see Joe, you know, the match is still going. And even though Joe was losing, he has brought the resilience to come back, because Joe he doesn't give up. He literally uses his life force to keep going until he has no more. That's the type of person that Joe is. He has no regard for his safety, no fear of it, because he's just determined to do what he has to do to ignite, to burn like embers, and to reach this stage of white ash that he's dreamt about. So Yoko decides to come back, and that's when Dampe decides to throw in the towel. But Joe, being Joe, he grabs the towel and throws it outside the ring. And Yoko picks it up, and Dampe tells Yoko, like, "Oh yeah, please give it back." And Yoko looks like she's gonna hand it to him, and then Yoko drops it. And then she runs to Joe and tells him, "No matter what, Joe, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there for you. You can do this. I'll be here till the end." And she becomes Joe's encouragement till the very end. She was the only person left that supported Joe in this match. Nobody else did because they were scared for Joe. It was just Yoko. At least those that really knew what this match meant, because Joe was dying out there in the ring. And Joe was a bit shocked about this. And so the match continues. And it's just brutal punching, back and forth, knockout after knockout. Joe's having hallucinations. He sees Rikishi, starts thinking about Rikishi. And Jose, his facade of this strong Macho Man facade breaks. Jose is scared. He's like, what am I fighting against? Who is this man? I feel like I'm fighting the ghost of a dead boxer. He should be dead. He knows that Joe is suffering from punch drunk syndrome. But Jose Mendoza says, this man is not scared to die, but I'm scared to die. I have a family. I have a wife and kids that I love. And he starts panicking. Even when Joe can't see and he's semi-conscious, sort of like slugged over, walking in the ring aimlessly, grunting with angry grunts, Jose sees this fire burning in Joe's eyes as Joe's kind of just doing these evil grunts. And Jose snaps and just starts beating up Joe like a street fighter, elbowing him in the face. You know, Jose is scared that this guy Joe's refusing to back down. By the end of it, they're still going at it, and it's the last round, and Dampe's proud of Joe, and Yoko's encouraging him on. But Dampe is like borderline about to break down. He wants it to stop. But Yoko is just absolutely supportive, 100% of Joe continuing with this, with everything that he's got. And Joe gives Jose Mendoza a cross counter punch, and then a triple cross counter right after, completely demolishing Jose's face in the last round. And then the match ends, and the match ends, and it comes down to points. And they both sit in their corner, and Dampe tells Joe, "You did great. You did spectacular. You made me proud." And then that's when it happens, you know. That's when it happens. Joe begins to lose consciousness, and as the announcer is ready to name who won the match, Joe's eyes close, and he didn't get to hear it. And the referee says, "Jose has won." And Dampe does kind of hang his head down a little bit, but he tells Joe, you did great. I'm proud of you, and I have no regrets." But as the referee holds up Jose Mendoza's hand, he has chipped teeth. His face is completely mushed up, destroyed. So bad, he looked like he aged 30 years. If Joe didn't kill this man at that point, he either forced him to retire or gave him brain damage. There's no way that Jose was ever himself again after that match. But then, as Dampe looks at... so after that, Joe ends up asking for Yoko, and Yoko was there the whole time. He just forgot, or because he's semi-conscious. And Yoko says, "Yes, I'm here. I'm here for you, and I've been here for you, and I will be here for you." And he tells Dampe to take off his gloves, and he says to give them to Yoko. He's like, "I want to give you my gloves. Like, I want you to have them." And Yoko takes these gloves covered in blood. You know, she was only, like I said, she was the only one that was really supportive of Joe at the end, even though it was a fight for his life, because even Dampe was too scared to go through with it. And Joe gives Yoko this warm smile, you know, something that he hadn't done before, right to Yoko, and looks up at the lights up ahead, and that's when his eyes close, and the announcement happens, and Dampe looks at Joe, and he gets scared, he gets frightened, he kind of backs up, and then the audience stands up. The children are kind of get worried. Gondo takes off his hat. You know, Shiraki looks shocked, and she drops her gloves. And that's when you see it. One of the most famous shots in all of media. The infamous shot of Joe, all white, sitting on this corner, facing ahead, with a smile on his face, completely white, because he reached it. He reached what Dampe didn't know Joe meant, that he has reached this stage where he has burnt to white ashes. And Ashita no Joe 2 ends. It's a masterpiece, and it's an amazing series. It did so well for me. It surpassed Legend of the Galactic Heroes for favorite series overall. But what else can I say? On a side note, the author's original ending was to have Joel survive the match and end up with living at the or staying at the Shiraki mansion with Yoko. There is a picture of this that exists, but the guy that did the person that did the art for his manga said no, that does not seem like a fitting ending for Joe, which resulted in the author letting the artist come up with the ending where we got the sitting in the corner of the ring ending. But that's it. That's Ashita no Joe 2, one of the greatest anime ever made. Yawoki even became my favorite character in anime, and that says a lot. So sorry, Paul Alberstein. Thank you for listening.